On the morning of my 65th birthday, I received the most extravagant gift of my life. My son, the boy I had raised, for whom I had sacrificed for decades, looked me straight in the eye and said, "You should move into an assisted living facility. Leave the house and money to me." I didn't argue. I didn't shed a tear. I simply smiled. I moved into the most luxurious assisted living facility in the city and signed the admission papers that very day. I signed an irrevocable trust agreement that completely excluded him from my assets, without the slightest pity for him. Without me, his world fell apart overnight. For me, however, my real life began the moment I closed that door behind me. I had never imagined I would spend my 65th birthday this way. All I wanted was a quiet dinner in the kitchen. I had prepared my chicken and rice stew, a creamy mushroom soup, and a fresh Caesar salad. The air was filled with the warm aroma of homemade food, and the table was already set. Polished silverware, candles in their holders, waiting for my son to come home. For an entire year, he hadn't set foot in this house. I remembered how, as a little boy, he'd stand by the kitchen door every birthday, a bouquet of wildflowers clutched in his small hands, peeking around the corner and whispering, "Happy birthday, Mommy." His eyes shining with pride. But now, I couldn't even recall the last time he had called me Mom. I glanced at the living room wall clock. It was 7:30 p.m. He had promised a surprise for this evening, but there was no sign of him yet. I lit the candles, blew them out, then lit them again. Finally, I gave up. It was 8:30 p.m. when the front door finally creaked open. "Surprise," Dawson stumbled in, reeking of liquor, a lazy smile on his face. Before I could say a word, a woman followed him, clinging to his arm. She wore flashy clothes, heavy makeup, swung a large handbag with one hand, and placed the other on her visibly pregnant belly. "Mom, here's the surprise I told you about," Dawson said, his voice laced with sarcasm. "This is Rosalie, my new fiancée. She's 6 months pregnant." I froze. "We thought it would be a good time for you to move back in," he added indifferently. "Rosalie will be delivering soon, and will need help during her recovery. You're retired anyway, so make yourself useful." Rosalie tilted her head, eyed me sideways, and wrinkled her nose. "She doesn't look fit enough to care for babies," she said. "Are you sure this will work?" I didn't move. My fingers clenched the hem of my dress. "Sure," Dawson continued with a shrug, as if we were discussing the weather. "If this doesn't suit you, there's always an assisted living facility. Those fancy places aren't cheap, and I hate wasting money." His voice held no warmth, no concern, just a veiled threat wrapped in cold indifference. "I let out a soft, almost weichtes Lauk." So, the big surprise was offering me a job as your babysitter? "And if I don't agree, you've already picked out a cheap assisted living facility for me." He blinked, clearly not expecting such a direct response. "Come on, Mom, don't be like that," he said. "Didn't you always say family comes first? Now your family needs you." I didn't answer. I turned and walked up the stairs without another word. Everything was crystal clear now. He hadn't stayed away for a year because he was busy. He had stayed away because I was only useful when he needed me. The meal I had so carefully prepared remained untouched on the table, growing cold, just like the last spark of warmth I felt for this house. That night, I sat by my bedroom window and dialed the number for Havenwood Estates, the city's finest assisted living facility. "Good evening, Havenwood Estates. How can we help you?" "I'd like to reserve an independent premium suite," I said calmly. "Paid for 20 years in advance." "Are you sure, ma'am? That's a considerable sum. Would you like to provide a family member as an emergency contact?" I paused, then said softly, "I have no family." There was a brief silence on the other end. "Understood. Our private moving team will be with you in 5 days." I ended the call and let my gaze drift to the dressing table, where 2 old photographs stood. One showed Archer and me at the beginning of our research careers, in lab coats and full of high hopes. The other showed a laughing baby, Dawson, in my arms. I reached out and turned the second photo face down. A quiet shiver ran through my chest. Perhaps, I thought, I no longer owed anyone my dignity. The next night, for the first time in my life, I felt truly relieved. In the morning, as I came downstairs, I heard the clatter of plates in the kitchen and Rosalie's harsh voice echoing through the walls. "This kitchen is totally outdated," she complained, tapping her manicured nail on the tiled countertop as if flicking dust from a dirty rug. "No steam oven, no air fryer. How am I supposed to make healthy food for the baby here?" Dawson lay sprawled on the dining table, scrolling idly through his phone, not looking up. "Morning, Mom. Would you mind making us breakfast? Rosalie's been pretty picky lately." I stared at the untouched stew from last night, still on the countertop. My carefully prepared birthday meal, ignored as if it were nothing but garbage. "You didn't even touch the food I made yesterday," I said in a monotone voice. Dawson shrugged, unrepentant. "Rosalie said it smelled too strong. She has a sensitive nose because of the pregnancy." Rosalie immediately interjected. "Yes, the whole house reeked. The greasy smell almost made me sick. Honestly, ordering takeout would have been easier." I silently collected the cold plates, ready to discard them. But as I opened the trash can, I paused. My mushroom soup, which I had simmered for 2 hours, had been thrown directly into the bin, the spoon still in the bowl. I held the ceramic plate in my hands, my knuckles white with tension. "Your stay here is only temporary," I finally said, my voice quiet, almost too quiet, like the calm before a summer storm. "This house is not a hotel, and certainly not a maternity retreat." Dawson frowned. "What's that supposed to mean? Rosalie is pregnant with my child. Couldn't you be a little more supportive? I mean, the house will be mine eventually anyway." "The child is yours," I said, looking him in the eye. "Not mine. I am 65 years old. I am neither your nanny, nor your housekeeper, nor your backup plan." "You weren't like this before." Dawson snapped, raising his voice. "You loved me. What happened to you? How did you get so cold?" I almost laughed. He was right. I had loved him, perhaps too much, enough to confuse it with an entitlement he believed was his forever. "Cold?" I asked, turning to him, each word deliberate. "You want to talk about cold? Cold is showing up on your mother's birthday with a pregnant stranger, treating her like a servant, and threatening her with an assisted living facility if she refuses." His mouth twisted, but he found no words. Rosalie broke the silence. "Dawson, don't argue with her. If she doesn't want to help, we can hire someone. We don't have to stay here and be treated like this." Then she nudged him lightly, her voice full of innuendo. "Didn't you say your mother still had savings? We're short on funds for the investment, remember? If she really loved you, she'd want to help, wouldn't she?" I looked Rosalie in the eye and saw pure, unconcealed greed behind her practiced smile. It turned my stomach. "So that's what this is about," I said softly. "You're not here for me, you're here for my money." Dawson's face tightened. "Don't say that about Rosalie. She just made a suggestion. And if you have money, what's wrong with helping your only son?" "Fine, then I have a suggestion too," I said, my voice icy. "You have to leave. This house no longer welcomes you." The air grew heavy. Dawson jumped up. "Seriously, you're kicking us out?" I faced his indignant, entitled expression and calmly said, "I have no right to let this continue." He shook his head in disbelief. "You're old. I'm your only son. Who do you think will take care of you when you're too weak to walk? Do you think your money will keep you company?" Rosalie, emboldened by his outburst, added with a sneer, "Exactly, if anyone should leave, it's you. Dawson and I aren't going anywhere, and don't even think about taking the money or the property with you. It stays here, where it belongs." I didn't answer. I looked at both of them, calm and silent, as a bitter laugh rose within me. They had completely forgotten who truly owned this house. In that moment, something within me changed. The last spark of hope I held for my son extinguished like a fading candle. I knew this time, there was no turning back. I would no longer live for anyone but myself. 2 days later, the house no longer felt like mine. Rosalie had taken over the living room, decorating a so-called baby nook with pink garlands, cartoon cushions, and shiny letter balloons. It seemed she wanted to turn the entire house into a nursery. There was no longer a quiet spot where I could enjoy a cup of coffee. Even the kitchen had become her territory. She had reorganized the cupboards to suit her own system, tossing my pill organizers, tea caddies, and carefully labeled recipe binders into the pantry as if they were trash. Meanwhile, Dawson spent most of his time in the study, making tense phone calls and sounding stressed. From what I gathered, his supposed new venture wasn't going well. More than once, I heard him complain about cash flow problems. Neither of them mentioned my birthday again, as if that night had never happened. I thought I was prepared, thought I had hardened myself enough not to be surprised. Yet some things caught me off guard. That afternoon, after pruning roses in the garden, I came into the kitchen and found Rosalie packing my fine porcelain dinnerware into a box. "This is totally old-fashioned," she muttered, wrinkling her nose. "I'm going to buy a modern set. Dawson said you wouldn't mind." "That dinnerware belonged to my mother," I said softly, standing in the doorway. She looked back, visibly annoyed. "Well, she's gone, isn't she? You can't live in the past forever." "This is my house," I stated firmly. "Not yours. And you have no say here." She snorted, pursed her lips, then said sharply, "You act as if this place belongs to you, but let's be honest, won't it soon belong to Dawson?" I smiled calmly and steadily. "Are you really so sure Dawson will still get this house?" That made her pause, but after a brief moment, she turned wordlessly and left the half-packed porcelain plates, as if they were trash. I knelt and began carefully placing the plates back into the cabinet, one by one. Each seemed a small act of defiance, a way to hold on a little longer, but I knew I couldn't do it alone. That night, I dialed a number I hadn't called in a long time. "Hello," answered a warm, familiar voice. It was Martha, the woman who had helped me run this house for years. Dawson had dismissed her last year without my consent, arguing there was no point in paying an old maid for a house with only one occupant. "It's me, Martha," I said softly. There was a surprised pause, then a rush of emotion. "Ma'am, thank goodness. I've prayed every day that you were well. I wondered if I should just drop by." "I'm fine," I said, a lump in my throat. "But I need you back." She arrived that very evening, just like old times. She stormed through the door, took off her coat, and went straight to the kitchen. "What in the world?" "There are takeout containers in the fridge." "Ma'am, how have you been eating this garbage?" "I can still cook," I said with a tired smile, "but the kitchen isn't mine anymore." She paused and looked into the living room. "That girl," I said. Martha nodded. "I always said the young master had no taste," she mumbled. "But this takes the cake. She's like all the others, only worse. And now she's bullying you too. Oh no, I won't stand for that." Just then, Rosalie came down the stairs. She stopped when she saw Martha, her face contorting. "Dawson, your mother hired someone? I thought we were trying to cut expenses." Martha straightened up and stared her down. "I was hired by the owner of this house. I answer to her, not to you." Rosalie snorted, strutted to the sofa, and dropped onto it without a word. But the hostility in her gaze was unmistakable. For dinner, Martha prepared my favorite dish, beef stew with vegetable soup. I ate slowly. Every bite felt like rebuilding parts of myself that had begun to crumble. When Dawson came home, the aroma hit him immediately. He sniffed the air and smiled. "Smells gut nicht." Martha emerged from the kitchen, pot in hand. "Sir, this was your favorite meal when you were little. Remember?" Dawson's smile faded, his face tightening with discomfort. "What are you doing here?" he asked, frowning. "Didn't I tell you you were retired?" "I brought her back," I said calmly. "Mom," Dawson sighed, rubbing his temples. "You're being stubborn again. I know you don't like Rosalie, but she's pregnant with your grandchild. Couldn't you be a little more understanding?" "Understanding?" I asked, laughing softly. "Do you think I brought Martha back because I don't like Rosalie?" I gestured to the dining table. "This is a home. Not a rental property, not just a place to crash. You can't erase everything that made this place mine." "Mom, are you even listening to yourself?" he said. You're ruining our chance to be a real family. If that's your idea of family, I said calmly, then I'd rather be alone. Dawson slammed his fork onto the table, making the plates clatter, and jumped up. Fine, be your little lonely queen, but don't come crawling back when you're old and helpless and no one's there to care for you. I held his gaze, unyielding. Better to live alone with open eyes than to be blindly used. In that moment, I knew something had changed between us forever. Every bond, every illusion of mother and son. We had crossed a line we couldn't uncross. I no longer expected him to understand me. I no longer believed he would change. All I wanted now was to spend the rest of my years without sacrificing my dignity for anyone. The sky outside the kitchen window was still dark as I finished my second cup of coffee at the dining table. Martha moved quietly through the kitchen, preparing breakfast. She asked no questions. She never had to. Her gaze fell on the thick stack of papers beside me, and finally she asked softly, "Ma'am, are you sure?" I nodded slightly and carefully closed the folder. It wasn't an impulsive decision. It had taken a long time to decide. For years, Dawson's rebellion and cruelty had hurt me like small blades. But I had always found excuses for him, telling myself he was just lost, that he would change over time. After all, I had spent a large part of my life raising him. But now, I could finally admit it. The place I once called home no longer belonged to me. The transition team from Havenwood Estates arrives tomorrow at 10 a.m., I said softly. I want everything to go smoothly. Martha froze at the stove, her eyes glistening. Ma'am, you've spent almost your entire life in this house. Precisely why it's time to say goodbye, I replied. She nodded silently and turned back to my pill dispenser. At 9:30 a.m., Dawson shuffled into the living room with bags under his eyes and Rosalie's handbag, as if it weighed a ton. As he entered the kitchen, he waved to Martha. Can you make an egg sandwich or something? Rosalie only wants your food now. 2 days ago, this kitchen didn't seem to suit her, Martha replied, cold as steel. Dawson frowned but said nothing. He dropped onto the sofa and turned on the TV. I watched him, the man who, as a child, had climbed onto my lap and begged me for bedtime stories. Now, he felt like a stranger who had rented a space in my house. Dawson, we need to talk, I said gently. Can it wait? He mumbled, not looking at me. I just sat down. Now, I said more firmly. Finally, he turned off the TV and looked at me, annoyed. Are you still mad? Mom, I told you Rosalie has good intentions. She's just direct and says what she thinks. That's not it, I said, pulling a single document from the folder and placing it on the table in front of him. This is my residential plan for Havenwood Estates. I'm moving tomorrow morning. At first, Dawson didn't react. He idly flipped through the pages, but as his gaze fell on terms like long-term residency, 24-hour concierge service, and advanced medical care, his expression changed. You're serious? He asked. He was silent for a moment, then forced a laugh. Well, maybe an assisted living facility isn't such a bad idea. Go, relax a bit. If you get bored, I can always find you another place. I looked at him without blinking. I'm not coming back. His smile froze. I'm transferring the ownership of this house to Martha and some close friends who have supported me over the years. Dawson jumped up. What the hell are you talking about? You're giving the house to the housekeeper. They have supported me for decades, I said. That's more than money can express. Mom, that's insane, he cried. I'm your son, and you've never treated me like a mother. The moment you came back here with Rosalie and demanded the house and my savings as if they were owed to you, you stopped being my son. You are nothing more than a man who uses blood ties to manipulate affection. His face turned red, his fingers trembling with rage. I knew something was off with you lately. You did all this behind my back. You had plenty of time to decide what I should cook, who I should care for, and where I should live, but you never asked what I wanted. He cursed softly. Okay, keep the house, but don't tell me you're throwing all your money away too. Without a word, I pulled out a second document and placed it on the coffee table. This is the irrevocable trust agreement I signed this morning. All my assets will be used for my medical and care needs at Havenwood Estates. The rest will go to a foundation for young artists, supporting their education and exhibitions. His eyes widened as he skimmed the page. You're giving your money to some dumb art fund? That dumb fund reflects what's important to me now, I said calmly. It's better if the money helps someone pursuing their dreams than being squandered by someone who only takes. He laughed bitterly. You've gone mad. Who starts a foundation at your age? I do, I said without blinking, because it's my money, and I decide how it's used. The air between us grew heavy and still. At that moment, the doorbell rang. Martha opened it, and the transition team from Havenwood Estates stepped in. 3 professionals in tailored suits, calm and polite, carrying clipboards, moving checklists and medical intake forms. Good morning, Ms. Vance, said one of them with a polite smile. We're here to guide you through the final steps of your move-in process. Dawson paled as reality dawned on him. This wasn't a threat, not a temporary state. This was real. And I was leaving. Mom, are you really going through with this? He asked, his voice cracking. You're leaving this house in the hands of strangers and just walking away from me? I calmly gathered the papers into the folder and stood up. I'm not the one leaving, Dawson, I said softly. You closed the door on me a long time ago. From now on, my life belongs to me, and you will never again decide what I do with it. The morning at Havenwood Estates was calm and full of light. I sat on a wicker chair on the balcony with a hot cup of rose tea, watching the lake shimmer gently in the morning light. The air smelled of something I hadn't breathed in years, freedom. No raised voices, no greedy stares, no one wanting anything from me. The Havenwood Estates team had handled everything with flawless elegance. The dietitian created my meal plans, the caregivers monitored my health data daily, and my calendar was filled with gardening classes, floral workshops, and art salons. It felt as if every forgotten part of my spirit was slowly coming back to life. For the first time in decades, I didn't have to tiptoe around others' moods or needs. My time was entirely my own. Via video call, Martha told me that everything at the old house was running perfectly. The property officially belonged to her and some trusted friends who had served loyally for years. I had no intention of ever returning. That afternoon, I began unpacking some of my oldest possessions. I had asked the Havenwood Estates concierge team to bring me a private trunk I hadn't opened in years. Inside, beneath layers of velvet, lay a heavy wooden frame I had almost forgotten. I lifted the fabric, and there it was. Her signature still perfectly intact in the lower right corner, Amelia Harrington. She had been my best friend in college. This was the last painting she gave me after we graduated. Amelia set off with a travel bag, her brushes and dreams, while I stayed behind, diving into my career and eventually a marriage that would change my life. We had quietly and inexorably drifted into different worlds. She called the painting Orchids in Evening Light, and sent it to me with a handwritten note. I know how much you love orchids in the afternoon light. I hope you always remember the dreams we shared. I had kept it sealed in my study, not because of its market value, but because it meant too much. But now, in the sunny sitting room of Havenwood Estates, the painting seemed to take on a new meaning. I was no longer the woman who ran a house and lived for others. Finally, I was someone who had the space and the right to reclaim her inner world. As I gazed at the painting, a quiet idea came to me. Perhaps it was time to share these things I had hidden for so long. Perhaps I could do something real for young artists, just as Amelia once was. At the time, I had no idea that this painting would mark the beginning of a new journey, until this morning, when the Havenwood Estates reception brought me an envelope, an invitation from the city's art museum for an exhibition of Amelia's later works, themed Women in Nature. 3 months prior, I had donated several of Amelia's later works to the museum, including Orchids in Evening Light. The art magazine Art Review Quarterly called it an extraordinary and radiant ode to life. These canvases had spent decades in my study, too personal to show, too precious to share. But now, I was ready. The exhibition hit the media like a bombshell. The New York Arts Weekly published a full-page article, Myla Vance donates Amelia Harrington's final works, a monumental gift to American women's art. While I was preparing for the exhibition, the Havenwood Estates media coordinator appeared at my door with a request for a video call from Martha. I answered. She stood at the front door of the old house, her expression inscrutable. "Ma'am," she said. "Your donation is in the news." Dawson saw it and almost overturned the coffee table. I chuckled softly. Still busy replacing the living room sofa with an expensive Italian piece? Martha sighed. "It's not the art that bothers him. It's that he's too late." She paused. "Today he said those paintings should be family heirlooms. Then he asked if you had anything else valuable hidden away." I nodded slowly. "So he's finally scared." She smiled wryly. "Even more interesting, someone from the bank was here. He applied for a personal loan. It was rejected. His accounts are frozen. He asked if you had anything to do with it." "I didn't touch his money," I replied calmly. "I just cut off his access to my auxiliary accounts and cancelled all automatic transfers. The rest was always his responsibility." "Of course," Martha said, her tone harder. "He tried to offer the house as collateral, only to learn that the deed was already in our names." I smiled faintly. "The last piece of the puzzle is in place." She hesitated. "Ma'am, are you really not leaving him anything?" I paused, then said gently, "There is one thing, a letter. When the time comes, give him the key to the safe deposit box." Martha nodded silently. I ended the call and turned to the window. Outside, the gardener was pruning roses. A group of neighbors gathered at the garden gazebo, exchanging tips for floral arrangements. 2 young people practiced violin near the fountain, their notes floating through the air like something sacred. Somewhere beyond this peaceful world, my son, the boy around whom my life once revolved, was beginning to learn what loss truly meant. Only now did he realize that he no longer had me, and no longer held power over me. But that was just the beginning. Night had fallen over the city, shrouding it in shadows and neon light. The afternoon rain still glittered on the streets, reflecting the blurred lights of car headlights and storefront signs. Dawson stood beneath the glowing sign of a bar, leaning against the door as if he no longer had the strength to stand upright. The cigarette between his fingers had long since burned out, yet he didn't flick the ash, seemingly not even noticing it. His face was hollow with exhaustion, dark circles under his eyes, and a faint smell of stale whiskey clung to his unshaven chin. I had long stopped tracking Dawson's life, yet however much I distanced myself, his name reached me through news, acquaintances, rumors I never wanted to hear. In the past month, he had tried everything: borrowed money from friends, sold half-baked business ideas to investors, even tried to contact me, hoping I would change my mind. No one was buying what he was selling anymore. I had severed every financial tie he had ever depended on. The house had been transferred, accounts frozen, access to my auxiliary accounts blocked, all automatic credit card payments cancelled, his loan applications rejected, his calls unanswered. Even Rosalie was starting to lose patience with him. "Dawson, exactly when are we getting the money?" she asked, her once sweet voice now sharp with impatience. She had believed she was marrying a man with a luxurious life, a carefree existence with a well-provided heir. But now she watched as that fantasy unraveled in real time, as Dawson went from trust fund prince to a man with mounting debts and no one left to deceive. That afternoon, after a gardening workshop, I sat on my balcony reviewing proposals for the foundation. One caught my eye. An art high school in Boston had submitted an application. They wanted to establish a studio in honor of Amelia Harrington, to support young artists from low-income families. I approved the grant immediately and included a fresh, printed letterhead from the foundation. The act, the purpose, everything meant more to me than writing Dawson a check. Just before dinner, a video call came in from Martha. She stood in front of the old house, her face tired and serious. "Ma'am, I need to bring you up to date," she said softly. "Dawson isn't doing well." I nodded silently, giving her space to continue. "He's had several loan applications rejected. None of his old friends are taking his calls. He's been seen in a few casinos, and he's already racked up considerable debts." I set down my teacup without a word. It didn't really surprise me. The moment he used a mother's love as currency, he took the first step toward losing everything. Someone saw him at a private club last night, Martha continued. He lost a lot of money. He tried to offer the house as collateral, only to learn too late that the deed is no longer in his name. They say he almost lost control there. I closed my eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. I've done enough, I said softly. If he can't see what's broken, no one can save him. There was a pause. Then Martha asked gently, "Will you ever see him again?" "I won't see him again," I replied, turning my gaze to the still water of the lake stretching beyond the balcony. I knew that one day, a final meeting between mother and son would take place, but it wouldn't be a reunion. It would be a definitive farewell. On the day he appeared at the entrance of Havenwood Estates, I was working on the Foundation's annual report. A nurse gently knocked on the door while I reviewed a section of the document. "Miss Vance," she said softly, "there's a man at reception. He says he's family." I put down my pen without hurrying. "What does he look like?" I asked. She hesitated, then replied quietly, "He looks tired and a bit run down." I nodded, stood up, put on my coat, and walked to the entrance. I saw him from a distance, standing at the edge of the garden path, near the blooming hydrangeas. He looked like a shadow of the man he once so desperately wanted to be. His clothes were wrinkled and stained, his hair disheveled, his face obscured by a stubbly beard. The pride that had once shone in his eyes was gone. We looked into each other's eyes for several seconds. His first words weren't "hello," or "I came to see you." They were, "You won at last." I stood at the top of the steps, looking at the man who was once my son. Now, just a boy with no more escape routes. "Dawson," I said softly. "This was never a competition. I didn't need to defeat you." He smiled bitterly. "I have nothing left. Even Rosalie is gone." I nodded, unmoved. "What do you want from me?" I asked. He opened his mouth, searching for words, finally lowering his gaze. I messed up." I sighed. His "I messed up" felt emptier than the tears he'd shed as a child over a broken vase, because this time, I knew he didn't regret it. He was lost. "I have nowhere left to go," he said in a barely audible whisper. "Are you really going to abandon me like this?" I was silent for a long time. "I'm not abandoning you, Dawson," I said. "I'm letting you take responsibility for yourself." He lifted his gaze. A spark of anger or pain, I couldn't tell the difference. "You weren't like this before," he said. "No, irraplia. I was the mother who gave up everything for you, even my dignity. But that woman no longer lives here. You can call it cruel. You can call it cold. But understand this, you brought us here." I turned and walked back into the house. The door closed softly behind me. I could sense he was still standing out there, but he didn't call out once. That night, as I lay in bed, the lake lapped gently against the shore outside my window. I thought of him as a baby, snuggling into my arms, gurgling and trying to form words. Back then, I believed that if I loved him enough, he would grow into a good, responsible man. But I had been wrong. True growth doesn't come from indulgence. It comes from learning to stand on your own 2 feet. I had let him go, and he had a long road ahead. As for me, I had much more to do. So many people to support, so many chapters of my life to write. I never thought I would start anew at this age. But such is life. The chapters that truly belong to you often only begin when you are convinced the story is over. Spring at Havenwood Estates is beautiful. The tulips in the garden are just beginning to sprout from the earth, and the lawn is dotted with violets, like dreams silently scattered across the grass. I sat on the balcony with the latest list of foundation grants on my lap. Since its inception, the Amelia Harrington Art Foundation has supported 12 young artists, 2 of whom are preparing for their first solo exhibitions. We've partnered with several local high schools to offer free art classes and materials to children from low-income families. Often, I'm asked, "Ms. Vance, what inspired you to dedicate your later years to art education?" I always smile and say, I simply decided to give wealth that would have been wasted to those who can truly make something of it. Yet the truth is, this has all been a gift to me. Every effort, every grant, every student supported, is my way of saying, I still have worth, I still have purpose, and I still have the power to create something meaningful. That night, I was invited to a small exhibition organized by the foundation. Havenwood Estates' multipurpose room had been transformed into a cozy, elegant gallery. A group of students stood proudly beside their artworks, chatting and laughing, their eyes shining with hope. A girl named Nora timidly approached me. Her painting was a minimalist watercolor of a solitary woman by a lake, with a blooming orchid at her side. "I painted this for you," she said softly. "I heard you love orchids." I smiled and took the painting in my hands. "Thank you, Nora," I said. "You know, this looks very much like me." Her eyes widened. "Really?" "Yes," I nodded. "But I am no longer the lonely woman by the lake. I have stepped into my own life." After the exhibition, I stood by the panoramic window, watching the moonlight dance on the lake's surface. In the distance, I heard the laughter of children, and in the next room, the senior choir practiced soft harmonies that blended like a lullaby. Life was now calm and kind. Later that evening, Martha sent me a message. The old house's community garden had finally been renovated. She attached a photo, old friends in the kitchen, laughing with pots and pans, fresh herbs, and blooming roses in the garden. It looked more vibrant than it ever had during my time there. I wrote back, "Take good care of this house. Consider it your second chapter." She replied, "You didn't just give us a house, you gave us dignity." I stared at her message for a long time, my eyes welling up. Only then did I realize that what I thought I had lost wasn't lost at all. It had merely transformed. A few days later, a handwritten letter arrived from Dawson. The handwriting was uneven and shaky, but I recognized it instantly. He wrote that he had finally read the last letter I had left for him. He said he now truly understood how much he had failed. He had moved into subsidized housing on the outskirts of town, found a job as a warehouse worker, and was trying to quit gambling. He knew this was the life he deserved, and he didn't expect forgiveness. But perhaps one day he hoped to stand before me, not to ask for anything, but so I could honestly see him as a new man. I didn't reply, but I carefully placed the letter in my drawer, right next to Amelia's painting. Perhaps one day I would forgive him, but not today. Not because I was still angry, but because I had finally learned to put myself first. This morning, the sun rose softly and golden, as I walked alone along the garden path of Havenwood Estates. The breeze was warm, and somehow I felt lighter, as if a part of me had finally let go. I knew my story wasn't over. Perhaps I had spent the first half of my life living for others, nurturing, pleasing, compromising, trying not to take up too much space. But the rest of it belonged to me. May my steps never again be pulled by someone else. May my heart never again shrink to fit into another's world. And may everything that comes after my 65th year finally be gloriously mine. Only when a man hits rock bottom does he begin to look back and truly see who was by his side when he was at the top. I used to think I had everything, money, time, and a life full of comforts. It wasn't until I lost everything that I realized life doesn't have a reset button. My name is Dawson Vance. They used to call me the Golden Boy. Rich, smart, well-connected, destined for success. Now, I'm just a man with nothing to show for himself. I want to tell my story, not to defend myself or elicit pity, but to give it meaning, to explain everything piece by piece, and to understand how I so thoroughly squandered such a perfect hand. Lately, I've been dreaming of my childhood. Back then, life was good, not perfect. Mom would hum an old tune while baking apple pie in the kitchen. The scent floated through the air like a promise. Outside, her roses bloomed in soft clusters, and I would sit on a small stool, waiting for the first cooled piece, and ask, "Mommy, will you always be with me?" She would smile and nod every time. "Of course, darling." Her hands were so delicate, able to conjure small masterpieces out of simple white paper for my school projects. Dad was a kind, learned man, a university professor who loved reading poetry on the sofa. He worked late almost every night, but every weekend he took me fishing at the lake. "Boys need to learn to be patient, Dawson," he would say. "If you can wait for a fish, you can wait for life." He didn't say much, but there was always something steadfast and warm in his eyes. They loved me deeply, and I loved them with all the might of a child's heart. If I had a cold or a fever, Mom would stay by my side all night. For my birthdays, Dad never gave me toys, but books. What a man should be proud of is his mind, not his wallet, he would say. Back then, I didn't understand those words.
Love fällt automatisch, unbreakable.
I never imagined what it would be like to lose them. Dad's death came out of the blue, a heart attack that struck like lightning. I remember that night, Mom hugging me, sobbing like a little girl. I cried too, but what I truly felt was fear. Fear that the ceiling had collapsed, that no one was left to hold it up. But Mom didn't fall apart. She stepped forward, handled Dad's affairs, restructured the family trust, and personally took care of every detail. And I got used to being taken care of. I truly respected her, but eventually, that respect transformed into something else. She gave me everything I wanted: clothes, toys, tuition, opportunities. I never lacked for anything good, not once. And what did I give her in return? Only a son who came home less and less often, a voice that grew colder with every visit, and disappointment after disappointment, piled up like unpaid debts. In high school, I had my first contact with that circle. Guys like me, rich, privileged, untouchable. Their parents owned half the city in real estate. Their mothers ran art galleries and organized charity events like fashion shows. After school, they drove sports cars to the beach, drank champagne, and spoke grandly of venture capital and connections, as if the world already belonged to them. At my first party, I watched a guy pop a bottle of Dom Perignon just to hear the crowd cheer. I don't know why, but something clicked inside me that night. I realized, status is the only currency that matters. So I changed. I started to hate the clean but simple shirts Mom picked out for me. I begged for expensive designer brands with flashy logos and empty prestige. I scorned Martha's warm, healthy meals. No more dinners at home. Only filet mignon at trendy restaurants and expensive wines I couldn't pronounce. I surrounded myself with friends who measured wealth by watches and bottle service. They took me to nightclubs, private poker rooms, luxury boutiques, and I spent, my God, how I spent. The moment I pulled out that black credit card, I felt invincible, like the heir I wanted to be, like someone important. And Mom became the only person I couldn't face. She'd ask, "What are you working on these days?" I'd brush it off. "Projects." She'd say, "You're spending too much." I'd scoff, "What's money for if not for spending?" She'd insist, "You need to take responsibility." I'd retort, "Then why leave me an inheritance?" The more she tried to reach me, the further I drifted. She didn't understand it. She didn't understand me. She didn't understand that I was trying to belong to a world where money mattered. So I began to see her not as my mother, but as an obstacle. The more she disapproved of my friends, the more I clung to them. The more she criticized my lifestyle, the more extravagantly I lived it. It wasn't that I didn't know I was disappointing her. I just didn't care. I told myself she was bitter, envied my freedom, was stingy, old-fashioned, and controlling. My friends reinforced this lie. "She doesn't want you to outdo her," they'd say. "She's jealous." So I stopped going home. And when I did, it was only to say, "I need capital for a startup. I have this investment opportunity. This is the foundation for our future." At first, she tried to talk to me, then she grew quiet. Finally, she stopped setting a place for me at the table. I didn't care. I told myself she was finally learning her place. But she never gave up. She continued to send me money every month. Martha still brought me medicine when I was sick. I never once thanked her. One time, I almost got involved in an illegal investment scheme. She got me a lawyer and cleared up the mess behind the scenes. I stormed home, furious, and yelled at her for interfering in my life. She just looked at me tiredly and calmly and said, "I just want to help you avoid the worst mistakes. It's my life." I snarled,
"You can't control ML forever."
Looking back, that was probably the cruelest thing I ever said to her, but the worst came later. Her 65th birthday. I didn't come home to celebrate, but to make my move. I brought Rosalie, who was pregnant. We needed money, and I thought her pregnancy would be the perfect bargaining chip. I told myself it was strategic. I would present Rosalie and the baby as a surprise, say we wanted to keep the family together, then ask her to move in with us and help after the birth. Once she softened, I would ask for the real help, financial support, just until we got back on our feet. I thought I was clever, but she saw right through me. When she said, "So, the big surprise is that I'm supposed to be your nanny," I felt the ground shake beneath me. For the first time, I realized she wasn't playing along anymore. I panicked but pretended I was still in control. She didn't scream, she didn't fight, she simply disappeared quietly and completely, without drama, without confrontation. She signed the contract for Havenwood Estates, set up an irrevocable trust, transferred the deed of the house, cut off all financial support. Every action was deliberate and consistent, as if she were writing a final farewell in indelible ink. And I still thought she would come back. I remember the day she gave me the papers for Havenwood Estates. My first reaction wasn't surprise, but rage. Not because she was leaving, but because she dared to leave without my permission. I was used to her waiting for me, to her forgiving me without argument, to her enduring no matter how much I pushed her. I thought she would always be the woman who patted my head, even after I broke her favorite porcelain cup, and whispered, "It's all right, darling, don't cry." But this time she turned around, and as she left, she took everything with her: the money, the house, the identity I had borrowed like a costume, even the love I pretended not to need. She took that from me too. I went to friends to borrow money. They said, "Dawson, your tricks haven't worked for a long time." I applied for loans. The bank said, "We're sorry, your linked accounts are deactivated." I tried to offer the house as collateral. That's when I learned it no longer belonged to me. And then Rosalie left too. She disappeared without a word. And just like that, I had nothing left to cling to. No baby, no partner, no excuse to crawl back to mom again. So I took a risk. I told myself I'd win it back in one night, maybe two. But I lost again and again, and with every wager, I lost a piece more of myself. When I stood before the gates of Havenwood Estates, I no longer recognized myself. Then I saw her, stepping out of the sunlight, as if she belonged there. Calm, with a clear gaze fulfilled. I said, "You won." She said, "This wasn't a competition." I said, "I messed up." She looked at me and asked, "And now?" And in that moment, I understood. She wasn't punishing me. She was finally choosing herself. That night, I returned to my new abode, if you could call a small apartment on the outskirts of town that. I sat at my second-hand desk, my hands trembling, and wrote her a letter. I wrote that I had found a job in a warehouse, that I was trying to start anew, that I didn't know if I could ever earn her forgiveness, but that I finally understood. She was the only person who had ever loved me unconditionally. I don't know if she will reply. I don't expect it, but I carefully folded the letter and sent it, because the truth is, I still have a long way to go. I have debts to pay, mistakes to correct, ruins I created that I must now rebuild piece by piece. She gave me everything, her kindness, her patience, her strength, and I trampled it all under the weight of my own pride. She wasn't my ATM, not my safety net. She was my home, and I thought she would never leave, but she did. Only now do I see she had already given me everything. Now it's my turn to spend the rest of my life becoming the man who might one day be worthy of the love I once took for granted. And that's all for today. What would you have done in my place? Write it in the comments. I love reading your thoughts. If you enjoyed this story, show it with a like and a subscription to the channel. And if you'd like to support me, I'd be thrilled with a super thanks. And if this story moved you, check out these other videos. You don't want to miss them. Glad you're here.